Thank you, Jasper. I'm honored. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity to discuss it. And honestly, the book is fresh, just newly published, and I will have some road trips and book launches around the country. So I'd love to share this with you, and I call it a Joseph plan to save Africa, but also all countries around the world, because these are basically kingdom principles in the economy that are fully aligned with the Bible, but also backed up by good economic research that I've done in the book to substantiate a lot of this. So I'll share a little bit at the end where people can get it, because you can get it directly from me, the book. It will be on the shelves, exclusive books, and around the country, but of course at a much higher price, at double the price. So with me, of course, I'll make it available at half that price, at 250 Rand. So, but yeah, wonderful. It's a real privilege. So, I'm not going to talk now a lot about the background. I just knew God wanted to put a kind of an economic blueprint on the table. I mean, in South Africa, for instance, we've dealt with a political question in 1994, but the economic question we have not dealt with properly. And what we've seen is political freedom has not brought about economic freedom. Actually, we are more enslaved economically, if I can put it in that terms, now than we were in 1994. And if you look at the global economy, there are a big centralization of economic power, both in the West and the East. In the West, capitalism as a system is being dominated by your big multinational companies, your elite role players, if I can put it like that, which also leads within a free market system to a centralization of economic power. And in the East, you've got the Chinese model and the whole socialist system of a controlled society, which is even more dangerous. So what I've done with the book, just in short, is to cut through both of that, to say there are certain things about capitalism as a system that we need to protect. We need to protect the free market functioning as a free market, but it's no use that it enslaves people in debt, or that the systems become so corruptible that the economy can't function. And, we are prone to financial crises and all of that. We need to diversify the economy, but also decentralize the economy. That is where the inclusive economy principle comes in, and the whole Ubuntu focus. So dealing with that in terms of capitalism, and then also the socialist model. There are aspects, you wouldn't believe it, in the socialist model in terms of economic collaboration and thinking collectively, not just doing profit for what's in it for me, but doing profit for what's in it for my community, for us, which are actually aligned with the Bible. We see that throughout the Bible. But the thing is, in a socialist context, it leads to a communist model and a centralization of power, which is even more dangerous. So I've kind of I wouldn't say taken the best of both, but developed a system, an economic model that can operate at a higher level, that solve the economic problems and challenges at a systemic level, because it's no use to just trim the branches. You need to deal with the roots of the issues, and then out of that, develop an alternative system that can eventually replace the current system that we have, at least in Africa. And it's based also on Ubuntu principles, which resonates with Africa and the people of Africa, because capitalism has not been successful in Africa. And there are reasons for that. So I believe with this system and the adjustments, this will be much more aligned. And out of that, actually, Ubuntu rises as Africa presenting a unique answer to the limitations that the West are experiencing with capitalism and the East are experiencing with socialism. So I'll touch base on that in a moment. So just as a way of starting, just to say, sometimes I've learned from, it's Covey, who said you need to differentiate between what is urgent and what is important. Now, not everything that is important is urgent, and not everything that is urgent is important. So if you look at the current situation in South Africa, around the world, and we might just expect, maybe as we speak here today, announcement by the Reserve Bank. We all think, all the economists think that it's going to go up, interest rates or the repo rate, which would definitely place a lot of pressure on living costs, hopefully reducing inflation. But we are in a crisis situation. There's a war going on between Ukraine and Russia. We come out of a pandemic. The world is just starting to get up, and then we are knocked down again with this war, resulting in an energy crisis, in a food crisis. So we've got all these urgent aspects. In South Africa, there's the whole crisis around Eskom, service delivery. So a lot of things are shouting at us. And it's very important that we deal with those absolutely and effectively and so on. But I would argue that there are certain things at a systemic level that are more important to deal with, because we can trim the branches and sort out the Eskom issue and the service delivery in the short term. But then you've got long-term structural systemic problems in the economy, which again leads to, further problems. So the book is very much tailored towards addressing that. Those issues, the systemic failures, and how to transition the economy from, linear models to circular models. And I'll explain that in a moment. And also it speaks to different levels with economic participants. There are proposals at a policy level for government in the book, where you need to deal with the macroeconomic factors. There are very good initiatives, proposals for at a business level, how to develop inclusive business models, that businesses can just implement. Today, I won't be able to delve into all of that, but I'm just touching on some of the aspects. And then there are practical examples and principles and methods involved for how to, do proper community development and how to transition your local economies in order to, create wealth that is valuable for the community and doesn't just flow out to the rest, but where you create wealth, but based on the right principles and values. So it speaks to all levels in the economy and much more than that as well. But just to say, I really hope the book will inspire people, give new vision, and really, activate new economic solutions. The book is not the, answer to everything, but it is a kind of a blueprint, I believe a handbook that will help guide people in terms of developing a new economy. So, let me just start off. This is what the cover page looks like. On the left, it's the back side of the book. There are meaning to all of this. If I can just quickly say the big focus on Africa, because I believe out of Africa, answers will come with an Ubuntu emphasis for the global economy. And then if you look at the, it's a young child running there. We need to think of the next generation. It's not just how are we going to change things, but it's for the generations to come. And I mean, we don't know when the end will come, but we need to labor as if, we're continuing, for however long the Lord permits. And then you will see at the top, there's a Fibonacci spiral. It's called the golden ratio. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on that. But it's almost like it's a signature in your body. There's this golden ratio. If you look at seashells, there's this ratio. The way waves break, there's this pine cones. You have that ratio. So there's something secret about that I believe is part of creation, which can also be a golden ratio answer for the economy. So I'll touch on that a bit later, but just to point that out. So this slide just gives you an indication. Some of the scholars in the field that has read the book, and they've recommended the book. The person who wrote the foreword was head of the SABC in the 1990s, Phil Molefe. And he said this book is a handbook for the new economy, a blueprint that all can follow. And then Bruno Rocher is the economist from Switzerland, chief economist from Mars Incorporated, where you get the Mars bars, big multinational company. And he said this book, is a way forward to restore the equilibrium, the right equilibrium in the economy. And I'll explain that in a key moment, and also emphasizing Ubuntu. Professor Aline Westerhoff is from a university in Netherlands, who said that it presents a challenging alternative to current financial capitalism. She's also an economist. And then another economist, Professor Johan Coetzee, a colleague of mine, emphasizing that it presents also a new moral and ethical standard for the economy. And I think this is significant because economists have always struggled with incorporating values in the economy, because it's a subjective topic, while as a science, you want to keep it focused on objective measures and objective focus. But the fact of the matter is, if by far the majority of people in a country is hungry and a small portion is not, then that becomes a moral issue. So the economy definitely are linked to moral questions. And you can't separate the economy from ethics, values, and morals. So in the book, one of the main things that I've emphasized throughout the book is the right values and principles. I'll share a little bit on that a bit later as well. But I think it also breaks ground in that area, because economists, they just want to steer away from anything related to values. Whereas values, when you want to change a system, you need to change the values. And this is basically some of the foundational aspects. So one of the key things I ask in the book, and as an opening question, I want to just put this on the table. Can we rethink the economy? So it's an important question, because I think a lot of business people and even, scholars and government officials get involved in economic decision-making at different levels, but they only think in terms of how to make the best out of the current situation and the system. They don't think out of the box. They try and make things work as it is. But we, as community builders, nation builders, need to ask this question of how to rethink the economy. Actually, my book presents a case, a proposal for how to rethink the economy. That's the essence of what my book is. A new economic model. The detail I'll just touch on, but I mean, if you read the book, you'll get the full picture of how to rethink the economy. Because we must remember the economy, is driven by forces that we think is out of control. But actually, it's based on people and people making decisions. It's a social science. So if we start making different decisions based on different incentives and different criteria, then we can literally reinvent the economy. And I think that's where we are. We actually have to, because we are seeing system collapse. I think the challenge with capitalism, and today's capitalism specifically, many call it super capitalism, where the rich get richer and the poor poorer, inequality is increasing, and the gap between the haves and the have-nots, is the fact that there's a disequilibrium between, on the one hand, the economy becoming more integrated or interconnected, but on the other hand, more and more people are getting isolated, getting excluded from the mainstream economy through poverty, unemployment, inequality. All of these forces are literally causing the majority of people to fall through the cracks. Now, the problem with this is that even if you have economic growth and you've got some progress and GDP per capita is improving and so on, it looks good on average. But the fact is, you don't really have genuine economic progress. For instance, if the economy is growing, but debt is growing at a faster rate, you are growing backwards. you're not making progress. Those are some of the elements that need to be addressed. If your economy is growing, but there is jobless growth or there's more and more inequality, it becomes hollow, your progress. And so with the inclusive economy, it is to deal with this hollowness and to say, listen, let's put substance back in the economy and make sure when we grow an inclusive economy and the economy in an inclusive way. And we look at how does that look like in a moment. So another question is, can we bring a turnaround that empowers the people more than the system? Because remember, a big part of the economy, even the way multinationals function, the way governments function in terms of policy making, is they try to feed the system and to make things work within the framework of the system. It's all about the system, and they forget it's actually about the people. So an inclusive economy with Ubuntu principles is about empowering the people to make a more productive contribution to the economy so that the economy can work for everybody. So that's the whole point of reference and approach. So absolutely, I'm convinced we can bring a turnaround if we build in a way that is aligned with an inclusive economy, because out of that, you can create new synergies in the economy develop inclusive economic thinking. I will touch on synergies important in a while, because that's a major thing. As you know, the definition of synergy is where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's exactly it. How can we create a collaborative economy where our interaction creates more value into the economy than when we were isolated? Only my business or my, economic engagement. But how can we think more collectively and out of that build synergy? Almost like the Muslims are doing in terms of, their cash economy within an economy, and they only support each other. And out of that, they centralize and build their money pool, if I can put it like that. So not the same way, but a similar kind of thinking. How can we be more collaborative in how we engage? Right. So the one thing that I want to emphasize, and this links to Ubuntu, is I think Ubuntu is presenting the missing link in the economy. It's the secret ingredient that I call it. Because the thing is, Ubuntu prioritizes people over profits. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't make profits. You have to be profitable as a business. But the question is, can you create more benefit for people than just profits? Ubuntu refocuses the economy on inclusive growth, inclusive business, inclusive development. I'll give more clarity on that in a moment. And then also it rebalances the economy. Listen to this: empowering the people and aligning economic progress with social equity on the one hand and ecological parity on the other hand. One of the major crises we have in the world economy, which really makes it unsustainable, is that we are using so much resources and we're not replenishing. For instance, if the third world countries, developing world, were to grow at the same rate and in the same way that the first world countries are growing, we will need 27 times more resources on the earth than what we currently have. And that's staggering, because that literally tells you the third world or developing countries can't grow at the same rate as the first world, because we will, the earth won't make it. The resources aren't. So there's an ecological parity, and I'll come back to that. Social equity, importantly, has to do with equality of opportunity and giving more people access to the economy. Why? Because more and more people are excluded. Please note, it's not social equality. It's social equity. There's a difference. Equality means everybody must be the same, almost in a communist country. Everybody must have the same house, the same income, the same everything. That's physically impossible. You will never have full economic equality. But social equity means each one should get what they deserve. Okay, it's like children. For the bigger children, you'll have a bigger slice of cake. For the smaller children, a smaller slice of cake. But it's fair in terms of, because it's proportional to the contribution of the individual, or the, you know, in that case, the child, the size of the child. That's what we mean with equity. And this is important because Ubuntu emphasized that's part of the principles. Right. So also Ubuntu sets a standard for how an inclusive economy should function, and then also substance for the hollowness. So it's urgent. The urgency is undoubtable. And also, here's an opportunity. While the system is collapsing, while the methods and the, you know, the systems of the world is actually not making it, it's the perfect opportunity to implement, you know, principles that are correct, values that are aligned with what we believe, and also you know, the system that can be the benefit to all, not just to a few. So although it's extremely difficult circumstances, it actually presents opportunity for a massive transition. But we need to be ready with the answers. And I believe with this book, it presents the answers, many of the answers. So what is an inclusive economy? The definition that I've put together is it's an economy driven by inclusive growth, and I'll explain inclusive growth in a moment, with the aim of yielding genuine economic progress to promote equality of opportunity, access, and also broader well-being in terms of both the people and the planet. Because you need, that's good stewardship. Good stewardship is about looking after the people. On the left, you'll see there the real wealth of the nation is the human development. The people is the real wealth of a nation, and enlarging their choices. So on the one hand, the people, not just the system, but the people. And on the other hand, the planet, the resources, good stewardship of your resources. And then just a quote on the right is actually Thabo Mbeki, who said, you can't be an island of wealth in a sea of poverty. Eventually you will drown. So those who are in power have a final opportunity, I'd say, to make the right choices, to include more in the economy so that the economy starts working for everybody. So, and this is policy makers, this is you know, people at the most influential decision-making positions, even in the corporate sector, and then also at community level. So, right. So, if we talk about just briefly the components of inclusive economy, not going to go into the detail. You're welcome to pause and read through all of that. But there are basically 5 components. What is an inclusive economy? An inclusive economy is equitable, and I've explained the concept of equity a moment ago, so I'm not going to repeat that. It is participatory. With other words, there needs to be access for more people to the economy to make a productive contribution. So it's not just about including for the sake of inclusion. And having a lot of free riders in the economy. No, you can't afford that. You need to include people productively so that they can contribute to the economy and to growth, and to also, you know, out of that, create further capacity, job creation, etc. in the economy. It's a growing economy, and as I said, inclusive growth. I'll speak to that in a moment. And then it must be sustainable. You know, inclusive economy is all about sustainability. With other words, you can't just have a linear model where it's you produce, you consume, and then you waste. It must be a circular model where you can recycle, upcycle, put it back into the economy, create opportunity for new participants, and out of that, you know, create circular processes. I'll also explain that in a moment. And then you need stability. If your economy is not stable, it's going to be prone to every financial crisis. It's going to be full of volatility, full of fluctuation, and you're going to be fully exposed to all kinds of weaknesses. If you have a more diversified, inclusive economy, that's where you create stability. You broaden your tax base, and also you make sure that you know, your productive capacity increase along with your human capacity. and also then, of course, policy, better decision-making at policy level and also community level. So I've identified through the research these 5 criteria that for me is essential to an inclusive economy. As you can see there in the circle, the first one is you need inclusive growth. I'll explain that. You need genuine economic progress. I'll explain that as well. It needs to be a circular economy and also a collaborative economy, and then your policies need to be inclusive. You need to deal with it at a policy level as well. It's no use to just do it at ground level. You need it from a macro and a micro level to meet each other. So, but actually it's an intervention in the economy, like a good, the Springboks are playing on Saturday, like a good intercept in the back line. I believe this is a literally intervention strategy, because the way the direction of the economy is going, it's just creating more problems. So by rebalancing the economy, you create a chance for better intervention. So let's get to the first criteria. And please, I'm just briefly going to touch on each one in the book. There's a whole chapter on inclusive growth and the research behind it and everything. So I'm just going to touch on the essence because of time. So with inclusive growth, we are talking about growth that promotes equal opportunities and also including contributions from all segments of society. So it's not just about the growth outcome, with other words, how much is GDP growing, but also about the process of growth. With other words, can we have more people contributing to the economy's growth and in that way create access? So inclusive growth, it looks broader than just is GDP growing or not. It also looks at, apart from the quantity of growth, let's look at the quality of growth. Because the quality of growth determines whether the growth is sustainable or not. So as you can see in that picture, it literally moves the economy from an industrial focus. And remember, there must be industries and factories. It's not anything against that per se, but moving that towards a society on the right that has a more horizontal structure. You'll see when I talk about the honeycomb model and so on, where society is more integrated, where the value that, for instance, factories create in the economy is better distributed or better, it activates initiatives in the economy where more are benefited through the factory or the business or whatever that's operating there. And in that way, you create circular principles in the economy. So you move from the typical trickle-down structure. The economists would always tell you about the trickle-down, where the rich earn a lot and then eventually it will trickle down to the poor. That's a vertical structure to a more horizontal structure where you build networks of collaboration. And then you can decentralize your economy. And this is one of the key things that I explain in the book, where you empower the people at community level. It's like a network. You spread the capacity of the economy instead of building this pyramid approach where you centralize power at the top. Economic growth without investment in human capital is not just unsustainable, it's unethical. Technology is important, but it must be put at the service of the masses. It's no use for technology just taking people's jobs. It must be at the service. So your people's capacity need to improve so that on the one hand, they can use technology better, but technology must be, to the benefit of the people and not lead to more dependency. There's a lot of talk about universal basic income grant and all of that stuff as we move into, transhumanism and, a fourth industrial revolution. For me, that's a major risk because it creates a welfare economy where people are even more dependent on a basic income. and that's not the answer. The answer is productive contribution to the economy. So we become what I call at the bottom the co-producers or prosumers. So people are not just consumers, they also contribute. So the things that I consume, let's say my plastic, suddenly I can turn my plastic into products or productive processes where I can put value back into the economy, especially if there's collaboration at community level. And then it's about shared growth. There's also other concept, pro growth, broad-based growth, to broaden your tax base, because when your tax base is broader, then you can reduce taxes on an average level at all the different income brackets, because more people are contributing to the fiscus, and in that way you can reduce the burden of the economy on some, and make sure that more people can contribute to the overall capacity of the economy. And then you can have, funds in place to deal with service delivery and all the things that are necessary to support the economy. The second criteria is genuine economic progress. There's one that author that I often quote, Joseph Stiglitz, one of my favorites. He said the current system, and this is where the concerns are, is that rather than justice for all, we are evolving into a system of justice for those who can afford it. And this is major concerns. With supercapitalism, you've got increasing debt levels, more and more exploitation, rising inequality, and the Chinese model of a controlled society, the social scoring system, for instance, is becoming a viable alternative to the West. So these are the things that just force us into, we have to move towards alternative. So as part of the alternative, you need to look at measuring the economy differently. Now, GDP is fine. We need to know what's the full production of the economy of goods and services, and to see GDP growing. But we need to have, as I said, inclusive growth. In other words, let's not look at the quantity of growth, but the quality of growth. Now, another way to support this is with a measure that I've put forward called the GPI, Genuine Progress Indicator. The difference is GDP only looks at your income levels and your production levels. And you probably know the classical GDP ratio, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, looking at your basic economic factors and the production from that and income generated. Here with the GPI, we look at also saying, okay, so this is the income generated, but at what cost was that income generated? What is the social costs and what is the environmental costs? So with the GPI, we measure those. The social costs, there you can see on the left, the social indicators. On the top right in that circle, you see the economic indicators and then the environmental indicators. All of those are pluses and minuses, to this component of the economic indicators, and say, yes, income is increasing, but let's see what is the net growth rate. When all these costs are subtracted, let's see what that is. So the graph that you see there is a comparison between GDP per capita and GPI per capita. So what it says is that although over time, you'll see there from 1945 to 2020, GDP per capita has gradually increased, which seems to look like, on average, people's, income levels are increasing. So we should have less inequality and less poverty. The reality is, in a genuine sense, we are actually worse off over time because of that measure, GPI per capita. And there's the formula that you see for that as well. It's all in the book and it's explained. So I'm not going to delve now into the quantitative analysis, but just to say that with this measure, you can help address the environmental issues, the costs, and also the social costs. Crime, for instance, just take crime as a social cost. How much crime is costing the South African economy is staggering. The economy is producing, but there's so much crime levels that, you know, the production, I mean, it's hollow progress. We don't actually move forward. So we need to deal with those issues. You know, other things as well. There you can see, you know, family breakdown, just the influence of divorce on economic growth. Nobody measures that, but we need to measure those kind of things, because if your family structures fall apart, then your economy essentially falls apart. And this is where the values emphasis that I put in the book is so important. Family values, in order to strengthen families, to strengthen communities, and out of that create unity, synergy, so that you can build more economic value. Right, so the third one is criteria. It's called the circular economy. Here's an interesting fact or question. Why is it that there's enough food for everybody, but still many or most people are hungry and also in poverty? So that tells you there's a problem with the system. How can there be enough food for everybody, but not everybody has access to food? The problem is access. And the problem is that the market is in full control of the food system. With other words, if people don't generate the income, or if they don't have money, they don't have access to food. You know, and with a circular economy, the whole focus is to turn that around and say, listen, we first need to meet people's basic needs, and out of that develop their capacity to contribute to the economy, and out of that create a system where there's more access for people, so that you're not just dependent on income or money to access the system. But if you can generate resources, let's put a system in place where we can have a sharing economy, or a resource sharing economy, where I can trade resource for resource. And I know those kind of systems are being developed from a technological point of view. And that's great news, because this will support this whole, you know, change in the economy. So we need an economy that is more regenerative, that replenishes, that redistributes, that is regenerative in terms of system and also in terms of the components of the economy. So, I mean, we are heading for a massive crisis where there's not going to be enough for everybody, and technology is not going to be the saving grace. Let me just say that. I think many people who are transhumanists and, you know, think that technology will be the savior. You know, you have something called the Frankenstein factor, where technology creates so many externalities, negative externalities, that it creates more problems in itself than providing solutions. So we need technology, of course, but you can't just say we'll sort out the food problems of the world through just genetically manipulated food or things that we mass produce or whatever. There are other problems with that. So we need to go natural. We need to replenish. We need to, you know, almost exactly what I say there in the middle, learn from the ecosystem of nature. Because the economy is also an ecosystem. And if we can employ the principles of nature's ecosystem in the economy, we have a fully sustainable economic model. Then we move from a linear model, take, make, use, waste, to a circular model where we replenish, regenerate, recycle, upcycle. And then on the left bottom, you can see you start creating the right equilibrium in the economy, where economic progress is aligned with ecological parity and social equity. That is equilibrium. That is sustainable progress. And that's towards which the inclusive economy is steering. So it's really a rebalancing based on Ubuntu principles. So what is interesting, if you jump to the right, at the right bottom, there you can see that the economy is overshooting in certain areas. On the outside circle indicates the ecological ceiling that we've got, and the inner ones are the social foundation. And in terms of social, the factors that I've explained, crime and family breakdown and all of that, are causing our economy to be weakened. And then we are producing so many things that are destructive to the environment that we are, beyond our ecological ceiling. So the circle in the middle is called what we call the donut economy, which is an interesting name, where we need to operate in that middle area, the safe space, safe and just space for humanity to thrive, where we build on solid social foundations, good water systems, food systems, health, fair income distribution, good education, family, and all of that, but also within the ecological ceiling. And that's where we start changing the processes of how we produce in the economy to become more sustainable. So that brings us to that safe space in the middle. And this is exactly where the inclusive economy is steering towards. So this is basically the solution it presents for developing economic sustainability. So there's just another example. On the left, you can see the processes, to refuse, to reform, to reduce the amount of things we consume, of the resources, and to reuse and replenish, and eventually develop a circular economy that is more sustainable. And also, this model helps us to decentralize the economy, because then it starts building in collaborative approaches where we build networks. And a network structure is a flat structure. It's not hierarchical like a pyramid. It's a flat structure, much stronger, much more sustainable. And through that, you start decentralizing the economy. On the right is just an example. Your multinational companies, the state often move towards, centralization of power, whereas the answer is towards decentralization. Let me just say something about that Fibonacci golden ratio that you see there. That's a golden spiral, but the Fibonacci ratio, you're welcome to go and Google it. It's a system where you add the previous number. So it's 1, 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. It's a whole sequence, but it generates a growth rate of 1.618 on average, and that's a kind of a golden ratio. So, one can even link that to economic growth rate. Yes, we need fast growth, but if we grow at a rate in which we, exploit too much resources, we are growing ourselves, into more problems. So a more sustainable growth rate is around that figure, but then it needs to be a circular context where you decentralize the economy and you also, have a network approach, exactly what I spoke about. So there's something about that. I'm not going to delve now into it. You're welcome to investigate it a bit more, but there's a golden ratio for the economy that I believe is a signature from God. Even our hands, this distances here is all in that golden ratio sequence. And your body as well, upper body, lower body, it's all in that. So you're welcome to Google it. There's lots of videos that explain that. So there's something unique there, and I believe God wants to bring it into the economy and the kind of systems we develop. So if we talk about just in terms of inclusive business, a big question is, how do I change my business model, from your classic business model to a more sustainable and even a circular business model? So what you'll see there, very interesting, is one aspect is moving from a shareholder approach towards a stakeholder approach. Yes, you need to create value for shareholders, but if you have a stakeholder approach, you involve much more stakeholders into the productive processes of the company. And what you do is actually you take the company out of the middle of its own ecosystem. Then the company exists for the purpose of the stakeholders. The benefit of that is that the stakeholders then put value back into the company. So I've explained in the book how you can adjust your value chains in the business, both on the supply side and the demand side, and upward and downward structures in the supply chain. And in the process, create more value or more circulation, where more value comes back to the company again, because you move from an inward focus to a more outward focus. And that takes you to a more circular and sustainable business model. We don't have time now, but in the book, I explain what I mean with resource loops, dematerializing resource loops. It basically refers to how you create value that comes back to the company by being involved in the community, but not just involved in a giving way, but also in a creating value way, so that you expand your market in the economy and also expand your capacity in order to draw value from the community. By giving back. There's a whole circular and creating feedback loops and all of that. So I explained that, but this is just an appetizer. So the fourth criteria I call the collaborative economy. So all of this is part of the inclusive economy. So inclusion cannot take place without intentional and purposeful economic collaboration. Now, we all know that capitalism operates on the basis of competition and not per se collaboration. And we need competition. The competition is absolutely needed. But the reality is life is a team sport. We need each other, and especially if we start decentralizing the economy, then your networks and your collaboration becomes much more important. Then you can address people's basic needs so that you reduce your dependency levels in the economy. And also when you address their needs, you can upskill them, or you can involve them in capital development processes so that their capacity to contribute increase. Then they're not just worrying about not to be hungry, then they are becoming creative in terms of, for instance, out of garbage or rubbish, start producing products that create value, not just for them, but in the economy, you know, and start those processes where you turn problems into solutions. And then also get your whole economy to start running at optimal levels. Because what we have now, not just because of the lockdown, what we have is a system where you can't operate at optimal levels. There are social costs and all kinds of costs involved that restrict businesses. So when you recalibrate the economy, recalibrate your business ecosystem, you know, through a collaborative approach, then you start unlocking new capacity for your business and within local economies. So what is needed is a combination of, the one aspect is a sharing economy. I wish I could have delved into that because it's so interesting how that is exploding around the world. The access economy, creating more access and more opportunity for businesses, and then a resource-based economy where people are not just forced to earn an income in order to trade, but through a sharing of resources, or to set up what I call Joseph storehouses in communities, where you've got certain things that are capacity available to people, which are properly, the inventory is well stewarded, and in that way there can be sharing of resources and create value for everyone. And reduce the cost and the burden of, ownership, because ownership involves, insurance, it involves service, it involves all kinds of additional costs. Whereas if you have a sharing economy process or approach, then you reduce the high cost level, and everybody still shares in the benefits. But of course, that needs to be managed very well. And then inclusive business, I touched on that. And then importantly, a shared economic ethos, or a shared economic values and principles that is established within this collaborative network. On the right, you see some of the priorities through this that can be put in place. So you create mutuality of benefits. So this is just another way to present a collaborative economy. On the right, you'll see there, that's a classic honeycomb model. And that has been developed as well, where you've got the different sectors of the economy: financial, goods sector, service, transportation. And out of that, you create sharing economy. Part of this is your Airbnb, your typical car sharing models, and all of those things where you reduce the amount of assets that you need, but you increase the amount of service that you provide through creating access and all of that. So these are some of the things, especially the millennials are fond of this, and they are really in tune with this approach. So it's not about, in the old days, we thought about you must have a certain amount of assets for you to be economically safe. Now it's not about assets, it's about access to assets. And for that, you need a network. And so it's explained in the book, but it's very, very interesting. So just the last criteria is called inclusive economic policies. And I know for the average person, you don't feel it's relevant, but the thing is, you are affected by the decisions that your government makes. If there's no political will to implement change at the macro level, the highest level, then you'll only have change at a local level. So you need to bring this together so that you've got an integrated approach. So what I've done, just briefly, I've developed what I call an inclusive economy matrix, where you can assess your economy and then formulate policy. On the right, you'll see the policy process in order to achieve eventually collective well-being. And that's important because it's not just about generating income in the economy and growth and all of that. It's about a more holistic approach where you improve people's quality of life and improve collective well-being. Individual well-being, but then also the well-being of the community. Because the moment collective well-being increase, then your crime levels drop, then your poverty levels drop, your unemployment decrease, your debt levels start dropping, because you've got all the right processes in place. And that's exactly what you do with the inclusive economy. There you can see some of the pillars, some of the components, but you need change at a policy level. Sorry, let me just quote what Nelson Mandela said at the top. He said, do not look the other way, do not hesitate, recognize that the world is hungry for action, not just words. Act with courage and vision. So if we don't have policy action, the systemic change of the economy will be very restricted. So the policy aspects, and you need inclusive institutions and inclusive policies. And in the book, I explain that. So the inclusive economy, for me, represents basically a wake-up call. It's a warning against the vices of capitalism and also the dangers of looming socialism. Milton Friedman said there that only a crisis, and I mean, we've gone through the pandemic, we've got wars happening in the world, energy crisis, food crisis. Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. Now, I'm not supporting and saying, let's take benefit from the crisis. I'm just saying this presents an opportunity. I'm not supporting what is happening, but I'm just saying this now puts people before choice. And he goes on and he says, when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. And I believe this is why I've written this book, why this the concept and the model of the inclusive economy is on the table, because it will become the politically and economically inevitable. This is the way, this is the answer to where the economy should be going. So it's about repurposing the economy. It's about setting a new equilibrium in the economy and eventually turning the weaknesses of the economy into strengths by recalibrating the economy built on the right values. Let me just say something about the values, and it's very interesting. And I was surprised that this comes out of the World Economic Forum. A few years ago, they published the article, and as you know, we have in society what is called the social contract, where we pay taxes and the government provides service, like a gentleman's agreement, and there's trust involved. And what they basically said is that the social contract is broken. There's no trust anymore between governments and the people. Very little trust also between the people and businesses. There's a distrust everywhere. And they proposed that instead of a social contract, we replace it with a social covenant. Now, I was surprised to even hear that term, because, I mean, that's not a term you would expect, a covenant. But what they explained with this is, and I agree with this, whereas your social contract is based on rights. If I do this, you must do that. You claim your rights, almost like a humanistic focus. A social covenant is based on shared values. So we hold each other accountable because we share the same values. And out of that, you've got more collaboration. And then you can implement the right values in the economy. And many will say, well, whose values are we going to take? The reality is humanity has automatically shared values. Take, for instance, the value of honesty. You won't be able to run the economy if there's no honesty. If everybody starts deceiving one another, people don't know what they're buying, and sellers and producers are deceiving people with fake products and all of that stuff, you don't have the economy. It collapses just because of honesty, one value put in place. So all of those values need to be put in place that people everywhere share. And I mean, though many of those values, they are aligned with the Bible even. So it's a way to recalibrate the economy based on agreement on values, which is possible through something like a social covenant or a social accord or social compact, whatever you want to call it. But it's business, it's government, local government, and citizens coming around the table and saying, listen, let's agree that this is the values where we're going to run this community, and we come in agreement, and we're going to collaborate, and out of that build the inclusive economy. When you've got that at ground level, at communities around the country, you can start building a network of agreements, and then you can filter that up to higher levels in government. So it's a way of governing the country from below by communities becoming organized, and you can use the economic situation as the one common denominator around which to implement values, and then through that create collaboration to put in place change and to start being the change, doing business differently, creating new opportunities in communities, for the poor and all of that. So I like what Rashay and Jacob said there at the bottom. To quote them, they said, we may now, in fact, have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reposition business as a restorative power for healing the global economy, an engine for profound positive change for the many. So in the last chapter, and I'm not going to delve into this because of time, I emphasize how can we do this great transition. On the left, those bullets, you can see there are certain coordinates. If you need to change a ship's direction, you need to change the coordinates. Those are ways, and I've touched on many of that as we've discussed. Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking we used when we created them. And this is exactly what the inclusive economy does. It forces us to start thinking at a new level, a different level of, reshaping the economy. And the economy is the strongest force of social organization. So through the economy, you can literally reorganize your whole society. The last quote is just from Winston Churchill. It's also the last sentence in the book, to say that at the end of the day, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. So I believe true economic freedom is our part, and this is the way to get it, because what we have is not true economic freedom. At the bottom is just a Gmail address to say, where people can contact me for books. You're welcome to pause and just refer to that. And just, I wrote this during lockdown, and that quote at the bottom came up that says, true hope can't be locked down. So I hope this encouraged you. I've done my part doing the research, developing this model, and it's really up to people to start implementing this, because I believe it is a blueprint that can be used. Thank you, Jasper.